Well, as always, it'll be helpful if you have God's Word open as we think about the events here in chapter 19 of 1 Kings together this evening. And it does follow very immediately on from what happens there in chapter 18, where everything looks like it's going well, and it looks like God's blessing is about to be completely fulfilled and satisfied among the people of God. The one thing that I didn't pick up on particularly this morning is that we're very interestingly told, I think there in verse 44, that Elijah prays 7 times before God restores the blessing of rain to Israel. Here's a little reminder. Elijah was a man of faith, and he had to keep praying in order for God's blessing to be granted. Just because you've prayed about it doesn't mean it is guaranteed the first time you pray. 7 we know is a number of perfection. He prayed, in that sense, the perfect number of times, and it was after he had prayed, God gave him and Israel the blessing that was being sought as they returned back to him. And in that, if you've been praying for a blessing, for any good thing, and the Lord has not yet given it to you, that doesn't mean the answer is going to be an ultimate no. But it does mean that it's not what the Lord intends for you just yet, if he is going to give it at all. So do not grow weary in praying, because God does give blessings to his people. And from Elijah's perspective, at the end of the events of Mount Carmel, everything looks wonderful, doesn't it? It's been a good day. God has displayed his power and glory and greatness to his people. They have returned seemingly to him. The prophets of Baal have been rightly and justly dealt with. And in some senses, we almost get this impression that Elijah is looking forward with a joy and a brightness for the people of Israel. And we're told there in verse 46 at the end of chapter 18 that the power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. He goes to the place where Ahab is. He's no longer needing to hide himself. He is now confident, or at least certainly looking forward to things getting better. He's looking forward to enjoying blessings from God. And we all know, to some extent I suspect, something of Elijah's perhaps what appears to be hopefulness here in the passage. We do have spiritual highs, and there are also, as we see here, spiritual lows. You know, when you've been on a camp, on a mission, when we've seen a baptism, or maybe when you were baptized, when we have a significant anniversary, there are moments where we say, yes, today's been a good day. You know, today, or maybe it's been a good week. This has been a time of blessing and a time of enjoyment, and I'm looking forward to what comes next. And we also, though, unfortunately know, don't we, times of spiritual lows. When we go through periods of suffering, or doubt, or oppression, or confusion. Times where we have a sense of no hope, where we feel a loss of direction. And Christians throughout all of the ages have experienced both of these sets of emotions, the ups and downs, the roller coaster that it can be with our emotions. Charles Spurgeon is well known for being an excellent preacher, but he's also well known for having had a long-standing battle with depression and dark and challenging thoughts at points because of things that happened in his ministry. William Cooper, whose hymn we just sang, is known for having some very deep lows and some really troubled moments at points. And John Newton, one of the other well-known hymn writers, was someone who lived nearby and is well known for having spent a good deal of time helping him in some of his really dark moods at times. Many pastors and those involved in ministry in the last few years, it's been well documented, there's been a huge number who have left the ministry from various capacities because of burnout, stress or anxiety. I know of just 3 pastors personally who in the last 4 months have been signed off for periods because of burnout. We are not immune from, as believers, from real emotional upset. And we sadly know that at times quite well. And Elijah, we see here, is demonstrating that for us and reminding us of that this evening. We're thankful then for the Bible, that it is a book that deals with real people. And we have a real God who engages with real people with real problems. And God is not ashamed to deal with people when we have problems. We are sensitive people, aren't we? And we all have emotions. They are actually made in order for us to be able to relate to God. Our emotions are keyed to thinking and enjoying and engaging with God. But like everything in this world, everything is tainted, isn't it, by the brokenness of sin. Things don't work in the way that God intended them to, and therefore our emotions become bigger. And we are supposed to be sensitive. It's not, some of us are more sensitive than others. Some are more aware of our own feelings, to the spirit and the sense of things round about us. Others of us seem to sort of go through life without being particularly touched by things. Actually, we are made to feel. The Psalms make that really obvious. We're made to feel, but what we need to be praying is, Lord, help me to feel in the right way. Help me to grasp and to understand what I'm feeling in the light of the ways that your word describes it. Now, just to say very simply, how do we deal with ups and downs, particularly like we'll see here with Elijah? And the first thing is that we need to just acknowledge that they are real. It's not just something that's in your heads. There have been times, haven't there, in the past where people have just sort of put everything to do, particularly with mental health and emotional health, and say it's just a load of rubbish. Pull yourself together. Just trust in Jesus. Now, that's not bad advice, is it, to just trust in Jesus? But sometimes there are other things going on. There are times where, just as much as we have physical illnesses, we can have spiritual and mental illnesses. And it's not something to be entirely ashamed of, although there is often still a stigma attached to that. We can have down days, and that's different from someone who's experiencing depression over a longer extended period. You need to say, there are points when medication is really helpful. And it's not wrong to take things medically to help adjust and correct a chemical imbalance that there can often be in us. There are things and ways, different therapies. I know a number of people at different points have used something called CBT. Just be careful with that. I know it can be really helpful, but also just remember, a lot of advice they give is from a different perspective at times from a Christian. But what you can do with it is take the good advice, and you actually can find a whole load of Bible verses that say the very similar things that direct you to God. You need to be just sensitive and aware going into that, if that's something that's ever approached or presented to you. You just need to remember as well, when dealing with people, when they have real mental and emotional problems, we are created beings. We are not God, who never has any problems or issues. One day we will be perfected. But for now, there are going to be, for different ones of us at different points, real battles to deal with. And they need to be met with grace and care and tenderness and sensitivity in all the right ways. But as we're going to see this evening, when it's hard, here are three things that we see rising up through this passage, and they're not all necessarily about mental and emotional health, but actually instead there's also a number of pictures here that draw us into a spiritual realm as believers. And the first thing we need to see this evening is that we should take shelter. Take shelter. Elijah, as I said, he appears to be sort of hopeful, doesn't he? The thing is, we know where things are going to go. We know that Ahab is going to go and tell his wife Jezebel, as we're told there in verses 1 and 2, and Jezebel is going to intend to try to put Elijah to death. Again, they've been trying for a while, but they've not succeeded because God had hidden him. And we know that opposition is going to carry on. But the only explanation we can have for why Elijah heads to where Ahab lives is that he is hopeful of things getting better. Actually, sometimes we struggle to think of things getting better, don't we? Sometimes almost as a protection against the possible hurt of hope not being realised, we just expect things to get worse. Actually, let's remind ourselves, in 1 Corinthians 13, we're told that love hopes all things. Do we hope for the best of outcomes? We might be pragmatic and practical. We might anticipate or be prepared to understand that things might get worse or might not go the way that they... But are we men and women who are hopeful? Because we have a God who redeems, who restores, a God who blesses, and a God who has, as Elijah has just seen, changed the entire heart and seemingly destination of an entire nation. God is not incapable of changing circumstances. And yet what Elijah finds is that things don't get better at all. He suddenly is presented with a complete fear of his life. Ahab goes and moans to his wife, who appears to be the real power behind the throne. And she says there in verse 2, "May the gods deal with me." Here we see Jezebel's absolute defiant heart. It is not may God, because though she knows who Elijah's God is, and God has just demonstrated and proved himself, her heart is still set on the gods, on Baal, on Asherah, on the other household gods that she would have had as well. May the gods deal with me. What a defiant woman that she is. And usually when people of this time would have said a statement like she does here, they would say it often with the drawing of a finger across the neck, meaning, if I don't kill Elijah tomorrow, may the gods kill me. Well, that they don't kill her. Why? Because as we were thinking this morning, they aren't even real. But it just shows how determined she is to get rid of Elijah. And what we often see and know in our own experience as well is that when evil is shown up as being evil, as Jezebel and her gods have been, one of the things that evil cannot cope with is being shown up as evil. And the immediate response is to strike back, isn't it? If you point out to someone that they've done something wrong, what are they likely to do? They're likely to strike at you. Hopefully not physically, but they're likely to want to bite back in some senses. And Jezebel wants to do exactly that. And so we don't blame him. Elijah gets up. Verse 3, he's afraid and he ran for his life. If we're confronted with physical problems or opposition, it is not wrong for us to get up and run. You don't expect, do you, when someone threatens you to stand there and go, okay then, come get me. He moves himself from the situation rapidly. He's doing a very practical thing here. He's not being a coward. There is great wisdom in wanting to protect his own life. But there is a bit of conflict in this man, because we find he runs away. He goes into the wilderness, we're told. He sits under a bush and he says to the Lord there in verse 4, "I've had enough, Lord, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." It's a bit of a strange thing, isn't it? Now, here is a man who doesn't want to die, because if he stayed where he was, Jezebel would have achieved that for him. And yet he says, Lord, I do want to end. I don't want to be here any longer. And really what he's expressing here is, Lord, I have had enough. I cannot do this on my own. I am utterly at my end. He is responding very humanly to the very human expressions of outrage and anger, to the danger that he has faced. He is wanting to escape from evil. He understands the danger that this evil Jezebel is presenting to him, and he doesn't want to be anywhere near it. Now, it's a bit of a unique situation, isn't it? Because we're not likely to be directly targeted by the powers that be, though there are Christians in the world today who are. Persecuted Christians face things like this frequently. And what the repeated pattern is through Scripture is that when there is physical danger, it's not wrong to flee. The Lord Jesus tells that to his disciples in Matthew chapter 10. You can read Matthew 10 verses 16 to 25. It's Jesus, he's sending his disciples out, but he says, if they persecute you, flee to another place. We have Paul escaping from Damascus in a basket over the wall. We've got the apostles, the other believers in Jerusalem, escaping, fleeing from Jerusalem as the persecution spreads. There is an evil, and they are not going to be found and put themselves victim to it. But there's a spiritual picture here. When Elijah spots an evil that is going to cause him harm, what does he do? He runs to a place where he can take at least shelter, find something where he is not going to be exposed to the danger any longer. We're quite good at watching out for physical dangers and trying to avoid them. How good are we at spotting spiritual evils that will present a danger or a harm to us and trying to escape from them? Now, we know what it's like, don't we? There are things that present themselves to us, and they, it may be a particular temptation. May have a real draw to us. It may be something that isn't even a temptation for us, but we're aware of. There are powers or laws being put in place, or things that are being designed, evil things that are designed to cause harm to God's people. Is it wrong to run away from them? If we find ourselves being targeted by the devil's schemes to bring us great harm, we need to be quite sensitive to that. We fear physical things, but how often do we fear spiritual things? The devil's plan is often to target God's people, and how does he do that? Well, he does it through a number of ways, doesn't he? How is that? Do you ever consider how the devil might be using evil things in our world to bring you harm as he targets your purity? There are a load of things, aren't there, that are being often thrown at our heads or our hearts. That means we need to watch out. Or what about, what evil things does the Lord use to target your marriage? Is there anyone or anything getting between you? What evil things does the Lord use to target your parenting? That includes, by the way, things that kids hear and pick up from other kids or from other places of authority. Are we aware and alert to that? Are we prepared to take action on that? Doesn't always mean running away, but are we alert to the evil dangers that there are in this world? And are we got to prepare to remove ourselves from them, or take action at least to find shelter from them? Sometimes as Christians we become a little bit naive to the evil and the harm that various dangers in our world can present to us. We think, well, it's okay, like the frog, you leave it in a pan of water and you slowly turn the temperature up, it doesn't hop out because it doesn't understand the danger. You drop it into a pan of boiling water. I mean, wouldn't want to be the person who tested this the first time, but it will just jump out straight away. It doesn't want to stay in the hot water. Sometimes we just become slow and deadened to the evil that is turning up the dial, looking to cause us harm in our land. It's good for us to be sensitive to that. And it is good for us to find a way to get out of it. But unlike Elijah, Elijah ends up here saying, I've got no chance, there is no hope. This is too great an evil seeking to attack me. So we're thankful, aren't we, that we have a God and a gospel that reminds us that evil has been overcome and defeated with Christ on the cross. But secondly, we find that we should receive care. Elijah is no doubt in a dark place, certainly emotionally and mentally, whether he's struggling with depression at this point or burnout or anxiety, but he is finding things immensely hard. And we feel for him in that, don't we? We all know what it's like when pressures get too much for us. And we are complex people. There is never, ever just one simple solution when people are struggling in a mental or emotional way. We are complex, we are multifaceted, there are many things that often are needed or helps that can be provided for us. We are complex, we're fearfully and wonderfully made, but we're fragile. And each one of us at different points needs help with different things. But what we see here is that God is the best carer of his people. God demonstrates what good care actually can also look like. Verse 5, though, it actually begins with this, is that Elijah, verses 4 and 5, Elijah actually expresses what he is struggling with to God. And initially, it's quite a simple thing, isn't it? We get more detail later on. But he immediately says, there in verse 4, I've had enough, Lord. I'm sure that we've all reached that point at times where we can say, for whatever reason, Lord, I've had enough. I've reached the limit. This is the maximum of what I can cope with. Lord, I don't want to be here to deal with this any longer. And God doesn't say to him, just believe in me. No, it's all right. I'll sort it all out. Actually, look at how God deals with Elijah. The first thing God does for Elijah is at the end of their verse 5 is he sends an angel who wakes Elijah up and says, get up and eat. Elijah goes back to sleep. He's woken up again, we're told there in verse 7 and 8, and he's told, here, have some more food. Physical care is a really helpful thing. You know, for anybody going through any hard point, any low point, any point of challenge or difficulty, we shouldn't overlook just the very simple benefit and blessing that we can be to each other just by providing food and rest. Providing food is usually something that we're quite happy to do, isn't it, as being British? Take a meal to someone, it's a good thing. You know, a way of physically expressing a care and a concern. And rest, well, rest is always important. We all have limits. We have capacities. We do tire out. We need to acknowledge that. It is only the Lord who does not sleep or slumber. You and I need that at times. There is only so long that we can keep going on maximum or even working on extra before we can't cope with anything more. It is when extra becomes normal that we really need to watch out. So God provides for Elijah physically. He gives him the rest that he needs. Very often for us in our day and age, it's quite hard, isn't it, at times to find rest, time to be still, time to think, time to just even find our own grounding and feet. And yet the Lord provides that exactly for Elijah. Not only that, he tells Elijah that he's going to go on a 40-day journey down to Horeb. He says, Elijah, you are going to come aside for a while. You're going to take a break. And you're going to come and meet with me so that I can meet your needs. Sometimes we can provide space for other people as they go through challenge. We can take burdens of ministry off them. We can help them in their own responsibilities. We can provide for them physical support in a way that as it becomes a representation of God's physical care to his people, we can honour God as we care for one another in a physical sense. And it's not just in times of mental or emotional turmoil like Elijah here, but also times of illness or other things, as we well know as a church. But then we also find the Lord providing Elijah with some soul care. Elijah is to travel to Mount Horeb. That is another name for Mount Sinai. Mount Sinai, as we remember, is the mountain where Moses went up to the top and he met with the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights as the Lord gave in Moses the very first time the stone tablets. It is on Mount Sinai that Moses hid himself in the cleft in the rock and God passed by and met with him. It is a place where God established a covenant, and therefore God in taking Elijah there is really making it very clear to Elijah, you need time with me. You're going to come and find yourself, I'm going to come and put my presence with you. He's calling to Elijah back to remember all the things that God has done and been, and his character in the past. And it's made even clearer, isn't it, as Elijah turns up on the mountain and there is a wind, a fire, an earthquake. As the Lord displays his ability over nature, he reminds Elijah just how great he is. Actually, isn't that one of the greatest things and the greatest benefits when anyone is struggling for whatever reason? That we remember who God is. It is very often when we're caught up in the whirlwind of our own emotions and feelings, the sensations of everything else that we're experiencing in what it means to be people, we need to be reminded of God and his nature. It's one of the reasons why we love singing hymns often or reading the Psalms, because one of the things when you read through the Psalms is it keeps pointing us and saying there's these great problems and these great struggles, but I keep remembering God brings me through, or God is faithful, God is just, God is a caring God, he is a loving God, he is a patient God, he is a God who hears and answers, he's a God that we can cry to, he's an accessible God. We need to keep reminding ourselves of that he is more capable to deal with our problems than we can always immediately understand. And God does that as he says to Elijah, come, meet with me. Remember me, see me. Verse 11, we're told that God is going to pass by, draw near to Elijah. I mean, what a particular blessing. Isn't that something that whenever any of us are struggling for whatever reason, we do want a sense of God being near us or with us? We'll take comfort from this. God's presence with Elijah. And even one more wonderfully in the New Testament age. As we see Jesus talking in the New Testament, when we become a believer, the Holy Spirit comes and lives in us. And he is very present in every moment. Every up and down. We're not alone. How often do you remind other believers of who God is? Something comforting, isn't there, in dwelling on the very nature of God. In all likelihood, the verses that you most enjoy and that you have inscribed in your heads or in your hearts, the ones that you go to, are going to be verses that remind you about who God is and what he's like to you. It's because that's part of the care that God gives to us, that he reminds us of exactly who he is. And God meets Elijah in a way that seems a bit mysterious, doesn't he? He meets Elijah as a gentle whisper. Now, God doesn't turn up in a great big thundercloud and come clamouring to Elijah and saying, you really shouldn't be here, and rebuking him. He turns up in a gentle whisper. He deals with Elijah gently. God deals with souls. He deals with his people gently. He knows Elijah's fears, and so he asks that repeated question. We see it there twice, verse 9 and verse 13. What are you doing here, Elijah? Why is he asking that? It's not because God didn't know. It's because God is making Elijah to understand what it is that he is feeling himself. An element of correct and right self-examination. Not just allowing Elijah to be lost in the whirlwind of emotions, but to completely understand, in his own heart, what it is that he's battling with. And Elijah says, well, basically, I'm all on my own. Well, that's not the reality, is it? We know that there's other prophets that have been hidden in the cave, and yet we've all been there like Elijah. Lord, I'm on my own. And God, by his very presence there, is reminding Elijah that he's not. But we feel for him in this. Now here is a man who knew that his task was to bring the people back to God. That has happened, and so the question comes for him, what now? We can understand that there is a sense of loss, there's a sense of disappointment almost, as he finds that God has not been wholeheartedly embraced by the people. We can understand how humanly he finds himself in a position of dejected looking forwards, instead of being able to enjoy the spiritual high that there had been. Actually, there's something in this of reminding us that, for pastors, for missionaries, for elders, for ministry workers of any sort, for pastors' wives as well, when their ministry comes to an end, there can be a sense of loss. What next? Wonderfully used by God, as Elijah had been here. A real blessing in many senses, and then there comes it's come to an end. Well, how does God meet Elijah in that? Well, God simply says to Elijah, verse 15, go back the way you came, go to the desert of Damascus and appoint these people. God says to Elijah, okay, you're struggling, Elijah, but let me remind you, you're not on your own, and your work is not done. Your usefulness is not over. Instead, Elijah, you're not called now to go and be another major mouthpiece against the people of Israel, but I have other things for you to do. You are going to still serve me, but in a different capacity. It's just something that we need to be aware of and make sure that we are looking to extend and to help different ones at different points, if that ends up being the case amongst us here. Elijah is reminded, you're not alone, Elijah, and you're not useless, but I have my uses for you. Here is God's care to Elijah. Ministry doesn't ever come to an end. It can just take a different form. Maybe if you've been involved in Spotlight or Friday Club or whatever group it is, or Gators for many, many years, there will come a point where you might not feel that you can carry on for whatever reason that might be. What comes on next? Well, it's going to be a different aspect of service. It might look different. It might be a very different role. But it's going to carry on. It's part of God's ongoing care, that our usefulness to him is not limited to one area only, but that it is extended as well. And then just thirdly, we see, just briefly this evening, God providing him then with a companion as well. Often when things are hard, a companion is helpful, isn't it? Someone to work with and alongside, a friend to share the burdens with, someone to walk along with. We'd love to know exactly what Elijah and Elisha talked about in all the journeys that they were going to make and the time that they did have together. That's not told to us, but Elijah actually already has at least one servant who he's left behind somewhere in the wilderness. God says, Elijah, you're going to find a new servant. Someone else who's going to come and work with you, who's going to take on and take over from you. And this scene with Elijah calling Elisha is just, there's more than we'll think about together this evening, but it's almost this sort of cosy picture of this son who's being a faithful servant, and he's just whisked away to go somewhere else. What we find here is Elisha says to Elijah, I'm happy to come with you. There's a joyfulness in working together. Actually, as believers, here is part of God's care for you and me. The companionship of other believers. The friendship that we have with other Christians. We may have very good friends who are not Christians. They are a blessing, no doubt. But there is a blessing in having Christian friends, isn't there? People who understand what it's like to live with God, to serve God, who can share things, we can share things with, we can weep with, we can rejoice with, we can know blessings with. That's why God puts us together as Christians in churches, because we're meant to serve together, to care together, to go on together. We're supposed to encourage one another. We're supposed to serve. Why? Because we are never alone as God's people. We're never meant to be alone. Elijah thought he was alone, and God says, no, you're not. here, have someone to deliberately spend time with you. We prepared to receive God's care to us in the way that he deals with us. We're prepared to receive and to give friendship to those who might need it. Maybe even friendships that we hadn't even anticipated. Things can become deeper and sweeter. Or friendships, new friendships can be opened, can't they? Ones that we hadn't even anticipated. That's part of God's goodness to Elijah, but it's a very simple reminder to him. Elijah, you feel physically distant, physically alone. I'm going to give someone to you physically. But just as God has reminded him spiritually, Elijah, you aren't alone. God graciously provides to him physically someone who is to represent what God is always to his people, present and caring. And it's hard. And there are times where it is really hard. Let's remember, God intends and is never distant. God again says, remember me, look to me, take time, and find your satisfaction in me. There are other things that might help you, but the place for every believer over and over again is God himself. And we all, don't we, at times know the need of our help to drive our hearts back to him and to find him to be our joy. And it is possible. The Spirit is there and his work is for that. And we can be thankful for a God who loves and cares.